Good afternoon. My name is Mark Evanier. I'm only doing 6 panels at this convention, a new low for me. But I like everyone I'm doing, and I hope you'll come to all of them because they'll be very interesting. And if you come to the ones tomorrow, we're going to be serialized with something new. Tomorrow afternoon, trip to this room or not, I'm going to spotlight on Gary here and also on Roy Thomas, who is yet to join us. And in those spotlights, I'm going to cover the early parts of their careers, the moments before they got to Marvel, how they broke into the business, and their lives after Marvel. For this panel, we're just going to talk about the years that these gentlemen, assuming Roy ever shows up, were at Marvel Comics. And I'm guessing from the age range of this audience, most of you are like me, were reading Marvel books when they were doing the book, working there, and enjoying them. And I feel like, when I see the Dodgers, come to see the LA Dodgers today, I'm going to go, that's not the Dodgers. The Dodgers had Sandy Koufax. The Dodgers have Maury Wills and Duke Snyder and Frank Howard and John Roseborough. Those aren't the Dodgers to me. To me, Marvel Comics is Stan and Jack and Steve and Don and John and Roy and Gary and all those people. So it's real nice to be able to talk to these people and find out more about that era. And the last few years, I've been fascinated at various conventions to get a chance to interview people like Gary and like Roy Thomas, who is slowly making his way to the stage even as I speak. And I can introduce you to Mr. Gary Friedrich, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. And I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Roy Thomas. Now, we're going to talk about, in your spotlight tomorrow, we'll talk about how you got to Marvel, your past career. We'll talk about your career after you left the editor job at Marvel. This panel, we're going to talk about the years you guys were both at Marvel, and Roy was there a little before Gary. I'm going to ask Gary first. I want you to describe, what year did you start working for Marvel?
I started working for Marvel in '66.
Okay. Describe for me that office.
We've done this before. Let me see if I can remember. It was in the Standard Branch building at 625 Madison Avenue, Madison and 59. And you take the elevator up, I believe it was on the 2nd floor. And you walk in, there was a receptionist in a small reception room with a few chairs, maybe a couch in there. And you talk to Jeannie, the switchboard girl, and if you knew the right people, she would let you into the inner sanctum. You walk into a hall, and if you walk straight through the door from the reception area into the Marvel offices, you walk in the office that was occupied at that time, as best I recall, by Saul Brodsky and Roy and Flo Steinberg. And we had all three. This is not a big room, but they were pretty close in there. It was a small suite of offices we had. To the right of that office was Stan's office. I think Stan had more room than all the rest of us put together. And the door was usually closed back there, and you didn't get called in there too often. Stan was usually in there doing whatever Stan did in there. If you went to the left, there was a very small office, which was used for whatever artists happened to come in to be doing some work in the Marvel bullpen on a particular day. And we also had a corrections man named Mari Koromoto, and Mari was in that room. And you might see Bill Everett in there if he were in town from Massachusetts doing some work when I first started. And John Romita would be in there. And you go across the hall, and I was in there, and not too long after I came, John Report was put in there and finished filling up the room. And they actually managed to squeeze Linda Fight in there a short time later when she came to work, doing some editorial work. And I believe Marie Severin was also in that room at the time. And that was it. It was just 3 little offices and Stan's office. There weren't that many of us, but the space was small enough that there was a crowd.
Now, Roy, do your memories match that?
Yes, except that's one office bigger than that. Because the third office that Marie and you didn't belong to us then. I don't know what was in there. When I came there, Flo and Saul were the only 2 people in the office, and I became the third. Stan, of course, had his office, which was the biggest. And then across the hall, there was Marie Severin, a little space for anybody who might be there, and some woman who was working on commercial comics, who was gone a few months. I remember writing something for Hojo Cola or something, and that was it. And Denny O'Neill then came in that office when he came up a couple months later. that was it. So it had actually grown by a year and a half later when Gary started on staff.
Now this was at
Growing by leaps and bounds.
now this was at 625, right?
Probably so. They changed it
They
down to.
moved you
I got
down the street
confused.
to 630.
The old joke was that we moved up and down Madison Avenue 2 or 3 times in that 10 years or so, 11 years I was there. And the joke was that it depended on how much exercise Martin Goodman's doctor told him to get, we would move up and down Madison Avenue. We did it 2 or 3 times. The Vision Building, the Standard Brands, a couple. It was 625 originally. We moved up and down.
I remember the first time I went there, it was in 1970, and you were at 635 Madison
Yeah.
at the time. And there was this little office, and Stan had a note on the door that said, "Hey, true believers, you found us here, but don't come in because we won't have time to, we'll start yakking with you and won't get our comics out. So do us a favor and go away." It's a very charming little note on the door. And you walked in, at that door, office I remember, you walked in, on the right was a cubicle with, I think Alan Brodsky was there. And to the left was a cubicle where Stu Schwartzberg had this big photostat machine that just stunk up the place. And Marie was next to it. Today, Marie Semple would have a wonderful lawsuit for employees, making employees inhale chemical fumes. You walked a little farther on the right, there was a cubicle with Tony Mortallero, Herb Trimpe, and John Romita in it. In the back, you had a desk, and then to the left of that was John Reporton's desk, and to the right was Stan's office. And it was the smallest, cramped little office I ever saw in my life. I couldn't believe the Marvel Comics were produced in this little rat hole of an office.
You didn't know how much we'd grown.
That's right. Okay. Now, Roy, when you were working in these offices, did you do much of your writing in the office, or was it all editorial and you wrote at home?
Well, that's the weird part. I was hired not as a assistant editor. I'd been that at DC for those couple of weeks, editorial assistant for the Superman books. But I was hired to be a staff writer after Stan gave me this writing test. And I was supposed to sit there at this corrugated desk they gave me, you know, flat surface there. I was supposed to sit there during the day and write stories, starting with, you know, modeling with Millie. I had to work my way up to Millie the model editor. And they would pay me freelance for that. They wanted me to be writing stuff, starting with, I guess the Iron Man, the very first Gene Colan Iron Man that I dialogued and Stan had plotted, and then a little later a couple of Ditko Doctor Stranges. But I was supposed to, for my salary, I was supposed to do that on staff. But it never worked out, because within a few days, Stan would keep calling. They'd ask me to do backup proofreading, you know, make sure that Stan's corrections had been done. Then they'd call me in to do this and that, erase something or other. Or Stan would call me in and say, you know, he knew that I knew Marvel's history so much. Well, it was only about 5 years ago. How hard was it, you know, and all that. So next thing you know, I kept saying, look, I can't get anything done. I was staying there till 8, 9 o'clock at night, working at home, and yet just getting paid the staff salary, except for when I did a superhero story. They were willing to pay me for money, but I didn't do that in the office. So after a few weeks, I decided, okay, you're no longer a staff writer, and I guess I was an editorial assistant. I don't know if he ever said exactly what it was. So I sort of evolved into that. And when Gary came, I remember one day, soon after Gary came, Stan said, you know, we got to have titles around here. So from now on, he says, Roy, you're the associate editor, and Gary's the assistant editor. And that's the person who knew exactly what you were.
But now, when you were first hired as a writer, you were being paid freelance rates to sit in the office, right? Or were they paying you by the week?
No, I was getting like $110. You know, and
how did that translate into the number of pages?
Well, it didn't exactly, and they didn't really have a quota that I was supposed to write, because they couldn't figure it out. I was just supposed to sit there and write as much as I could, and it turned out I really couldn't write much. For one thing, I'm not, some people are, I'm not a person, Gary could do this, but I can't write when there's music on, at least verbal music. And most of the stuff I'd like to do, you know, early rock and roll, Sinatra, things like that, it's all mostly verbal. I mean, you know, some jazz and classical, and I can't do that and work at the same time. So when there was talking in the office, and there always was, Saul's on the phone to somebody, the phone's ringing, Stan comes in, I just found that I wasn't ever able to concentrate and get anything done. So I was an amazingly wonderful flop at being a staff writer, and that's how I ended up being the editorial.
Okay. Now, they gave you that Iron Man, the dialogue that Stan had, and then they stuck you with Dr. Strange. You did the last 2 Dr. Strange.
No, because then I got yanked off that when I did Sergeant Fury and stuff, and Denny O'Neil took over and did 2 or 3 of the last ones, including the very last one Ditko did. Then Stan came back very briefly to break Bill Everett in, and then he abandoned the rest.
Now, Stan has a mental block. He swears.
He's a Lego set all by himself.
One of the